Good afternoon, everyone. We're just setting things up so that we're ready to begin this at 5 o'clock. So join us and we shall start shortly.
because I'm leaving for Middleburg on Friday morning and I want to get back Monday evening.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get the show on the road. You can say hello to our over there. Wave nicely for the camera. And there's nobody on, but people can come back later and watch it on YouTube. So I think most of our online guys are going to join us just now. The invite went out and did say starting at 5 instead of 4:30 in the past, because we had people then join at 4:30 and then there was nobody there and they were waiting. So my PC is saying it's 4:59, my watch is saying it's 4:59, but that's okay. When the guys start, then they'll actually find that we're online and we're on time for a change. So that'll confuse the heck out of them. Okay, let's put this back onto the slideshow. There we have it. Okay, so welcome to the 5th of these sessions that we're holding. It's 5 weeks down from where we started. So as much as we started with a lot of time available, that time is ticking by quite quickly. So we need to make sure we hang in there. Okay, now where is... I need bigger screens and more screens. Okay, so the agenda for tonight is relatively short. Introductions, if we need them, which we can do quite quickly, recap on what was expected and the provisional schedule. Most of the time this evening to be spent on challenges, questions and answers. We've got a couple of different sets of questions that people are struggling with, so we can go through those. We can add in any additional ones from anybody online or anybody else who arrives a bit later. And then we can talk about next week. There's the start of another big chapter next week. And yeah, then that's pretty much it. So introductions, I'm going to turn the camera back on for a second to allow everybody to introduce themselves on camera for a change. So I'm Justin and I'm hosting this. You can read the slide if you want to know all about me.
Hi, I'm Melissa, and 5 weeks down the line, I'm feeling a bit more confident.
Hi, I'm Zubair, work at ITSec. We're also getting along quite well now. The work should be going on soon.
I'm Ismail with ITSec. Trying to get into the groove of things. Hopefully it goes well.
Yeah, we're expecting some other people to join us online a little bit later. So let's get those slides back up there. Okay, so just a quick recap. This week you should have gone through the rest of chapter 2 and finished all of the material, made notes, indicated anything you don't understand and brought that along with, and then spent some significant time on sample questions. So you can start to get a feel for how they're going to test the material when it comes to the exam. Okay. The provisional schedule, we're pretty much on target. This week, 7th of April, we're finishing up on chapter 2, starting next week in chapter 3. So that's good news. At least we're managing to keep to the schedule. And yeah, that's what we need to cover ahead. And we still got a little bit of time until that June date, but it's definitely coming up fast. Just a reminder about chapter 2, there were 46 pages in chapter 2, so it's the second shortest chapter. Also worth the least amount of marks along with chapter 1. But given the length of the chapter, it's reasonable density of marks per page. And yeah. So perhaps let's just start on challenges on chapter 2. So you mentioned earlier you were still struggling a little bit with the segregation of duties, but that the table in the chapter covers it quite nicely, and you need to just spend some more time going through that. I'm sure as you go through the sample questions as well, you'll find there's quite a few questions around that. So as you do more of those, it'll also help you see how they can potentially test the information in the table, because it's quite difficult to just study the table kind of off by heart. That's not really going to help you.
Yeah, because even in the questions, you don't only talk about these types of groups and things. Like I came across one which was a telecommunication analyst.
Yeah.
So, but then I read through the answer and then I figured out, okay, so those are like types of things. So,
and I think that's the way it's going to be. It's never, it's unlikely to just be word for word exactly as it is in the book. Hi, Jonathan. Okay. Were there any other issues, Jonathan? We're just chatting around. In this last week, you should have gone through the second half of chapter 2. So, were there any other issues that came to light in terms of the material that was in that second half of that chapter? Whether there was anything that you battled with, or any key concepts that were problematic?
I went through that whole section. It's quite okay because well, I did some press and then I referred to answers just to cross-check.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I also had a lot of preparation to do for my tomorrow exam. Probably it's double maybe. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I'm glad that you're still here, even though you've got an exam tomorrow. We should be proud of you for that. See, this man's dedicated. Okay, I think then let's move on to the question and answers. I think that was always the intention of being the main thing that we wanted to discuss this afternoon. So what we've tried to do today to make it a little bit easier for everybody to follow is to have those questions and answers in electronic format so that we can put it on screen and discuss it that way, rather than people online trying to guess what we're talking about. So we've got in a Word document. So I'm going to start, Zubair, with the ones that you gave us. So I'm going to pop that up there. Now what we need to just do is... Hi. Okay. What we don't necessarily want to do is be able to see what the answers are for all of these things. So we're going to have to scroll them quite carefully. Okay. So let me just zoom that a bit more.
Yeah, question on top.
Okay, let's just see. I'm going to have to, for each question, kind of just resume it and see how we can do it. Okay, so these questions were from the online study database. Okay. So, Zubair, maybe you want to take us through this first one. I won't make you take us through all of them, but for the first one you can.
So basically the question states, in reviewing the IT short range, which is the tactical plan, an IS auditor should determine whether, and then the 4 options are, there is an integration of IT and business personnel within projects, there is a clear definition of the IT mission and vision, is strategic information technology planning scorecard is in place, or the plan correlates business objectives to IT goals and objectives. So basically you get the tactical plan in this, and the strategic plan, one is short term and one is long term. So I was just trying to answer based on that. I think I got that wrong, and I now know why. So just you can explain that.
No? Okay, so if we have a look at that then, I think you're quite right in that it's talking specifically about short-range plans, okay? Not about that longer strategic objective and the strategic alignment. And that's quite fundamental, because one can easily be fooled into thinking that everything we worry about is always around alignment of IT to business. And while alignment of IT to business is important, and it's very much important when it comes to the strategic and the longer term, when it comes to the shorter term, there's other potentially more important things that we need to think about and deal with. Okay, so if it was talking strategy, then it could be D, yes, the plan correlating business objectives to what's happening within the IT space. Okay, so we can see that it's not D. Some of you would have read the answer, others not. Okay, so somebody want to have a guess then as to what the answer should be? So you know what the answer is, so we won't ask you to guess it.
I'll say B.
B, there's a clear definition of the IT mission and vision. Okay, is that something you think should be in the tactical plan?
Yeah, I say that because if we are not sure of, if we don't have the exact like direction, if our mission is not clear, then even our tactical plans, our short-term plans are nowhere.
Okay.
So we don't know what to plan for the short term.
Okay, hold that thought. Other answers?
I know you mentioned strategic, but I would assume, given the fact that you're basing it on tactics, C, strategic information planning scorecard.
Okay.
Then I'll go for A.
Okay, and the answer is
A.
A. Okay, so let's have a look at what's
That's why I was a bit confused.
there.
Integration.
So let's have a look at what they're saying. So they're saying the definition of the IT mission and vision is covered in the strategic plan. That's that higher level, longer term one. Okay, it's not in the tactical short term stuff, because you're not going to be changing your mission and vision often. That should be something that sets that longer term what it is we want to do. Okay, the strategic information technology planning scorecard is also covered in your strategic plan, not in your tactical plan. Tactical plan's covering the more day-to-day kind of project level stuff. Okay, and in order to do that, the integration of the IT and business personnel in projects is the more operational issue that needs to be considered and addressed. Because if you've got all these projects that you want to do, you've got people who have to do the projects. And it's critically important that you allocate those people to the projects and get on and get those projects done. And that's a very much tactical rather than strategic level item. And it's more operational in nature. Okay.
So in a sense, operational is short term.
Operational,
Day-to-day.
yeah. And normally when you look at things, you look at them in 3 levels. Strategic being that top higher level, then tactical level, then operational being the very operational day-to-day kind of stuff. So here they're moving it and saying we're not looking at that strategic level. We're dropping down that level to their tactic, which is, and the tactic integrates with the operational. Okay. So one has to just be a little bit careful when looking at questions like this. Okay.
Because in this case, almost every answer seems to be correct.
If you replace the word short range tactical up there with strategic, then 3 of the answers would be correct. Okay, but you wouldn't be dealing with the integration of IT and business personnel within projects in your strategy. Okay, the strategy may lay out which projects you think are important that you want to do, but it wouldn't go that next level down in terms of saying which people are going to deal with which projects. Okay, that'll happen in your tactical plan. All the other elements get covered at the strategic level. Okay. Okay. Let's try and scroll this thing down now. And do it slowly so we can get to the next question without giving you the answer. So we're making it easy for you. We're giving you one incorrect one immediately. So now it's down to 3 instead of down to 4. Okay. So an IS auditor is reviewing a contract management process to determine the financial viability of a software vendor for a critical business application. Okay. An IS auditor should determine whether the vendor being considered, and then it gives us some options there. So again, let's start by breaking down the question before we start looking at the answers. So we're reviewing a contract management process. Okay. We need to determine the financial viability of a software vendor for a critical business application. So clearly the focus then must be around the financial viability of the vendor. Okay. So, and it's a critical business application. So why would we be looking at the financial viability of a software vendor?
To see if it can support the organization in the long term.
in the long term, yes. Okay, so we're not so much worried about whether he can deliver us a CD tomorrow with the software on it, but is he going to be around in a year's time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time? Because to put in an application takes a lot of time and money, especially in a large organization and a complex organization. You look at some of these SAP implementations and the like. It can take a year to 3 years just to implement the thing and getting it running smoothly. And if you had to change that at short notice, you're really going to struggle. Okay, so we're going to want to know that vendors are around. So with that in mind, if we look at the options, okay, A can deliver on the immediate contract. Okay, this is not about the immediate, this is about the long term. Okay. B is of similar financial standing as the organization. Oh, I'm not so sure about that. Just because our organization might not be doing so great financially doesn't mean we want to deal with other organizations that are not doing so well financially. Okay. C has significant financial obligations that can impose liability to the organization. No, it's the opposite of that. You want to know that they've got cash in the bank, or they've got support, or they've got a big parent company that's going to keep them going. D can support the organization in the long term. Absolutely. That's what we started off by saying. That's what we need.
So it's all about breaking down the question and then
in a lot of cases, it can do that, and it can help you get to the answer. Okay, we've got the question, we've got time, we must break it down. It won't work on all questions, but it's definitely the starting point. Okay, so there's the official answers, and it pretty much matches what we're saying. So the long-term financial viability of a vendor is essential for deriving maximum value for the organization. It's more likely that a financially sound vendor would be in business for a long period of time, and thereby more likely to be capable of providing long-term support for the organization and for the application. So the next question. An IS auditor is reviewing a third-party agreement for a new cloud-based accounting service provider. Which of the following considerations is the most important with regard to the privacy of the accounting data? Okay, so break it down again. So we're reviewing a third-party agreement. Okay, so it's some kind of contract or document we're looking at. Okay, it's a new cloud-based accounting service provider. So it's not somebody we've done business with before. We're doing something new here. Okay. Which of the following considerations is most important with regard to the privacy of the information? So they're not saying availability. Okay. They're not talking about integrity. They're talking about privacy. Okay. So if we then look at the options. Okay. A, data retention, backup, and recovery. Okay. So when we were breaking down the question, we were saying that we're looking at privacy. So A is unlikely to be the one, because it's not about privacy. That's about your availability and long-term availability. B, return or destruction of information. Well, yeah, that could be. If we stop using these guys, how are we going to get our information back or know that they've destroyed it? And it's not going to be sitting around on a server somewhere or leaking out somewhere. So that could certainly be an option. Okay. Network and intrusion detection. Okay. That's more around the overall security and how they manage stuff. Zubair chose that one, so, and it's already told us it's wrong, so we know it's wrong. Okay. You see,
it's what it detects.
So in the intrusion detection system, there's normally a system that you put on the network, okay, and it's normally looking for some kind of signatures or activity on the network that shouldn't be there. And when that happens, it sets off an alert. You can then go and investigate it, find what's going on, and then you can deal with that particular issue. Okay, so it's something that any mature organization should have in place, but it's not directly related to privacy. Okay, and although you would expect your cloud provider to have those things in place, things like encryption, and there's other things that would be more closely related to privacy. Okay, I think as we go through the chapters, I'm sure network and intrusion detection will come up again, and we can discuss in a bit more detail exactly what it is and how it works. Okay, so D, a patch management process. Again, it's more operational. It's kind of in a way almost the same level as the network and intrusion detection. So it's something that you should have within an organization. If you don't have it, you're going to get hacked at some point. But it's not directly related to the privacy of the accounting data, I don't think. So looking at those, I would go with B as being the most likely one. I'm hoping, Zubair, that B is the right one. Otherwise, my logic is fundamentally flawed somewhere. Okay, so they're saying the answer is B, because that's the only one that's directly related to the privacy of the information. Okay, let's look at this here. When reviewing a third-party agreement, the most important consideration with regard to the privacy of the data is the clause concerning the return or secure destruction of information at the end of the contract. Okay. Everybody happy with that? So with all the other ones, they're saying they are important, but backups are important, but don't guarantee privacy. Network and intrusion detection are helpful in securing data, but on their own do not guarantee privacy. Patch management is important, but doesn't affect privacy. Unless you get hacked, in which case it could. But yeah, it's not directly related. Okay. The next question, when auditing the IT governance framework and IT risk management practices that exist within an organization, the IS auditor identified some undefined responsibilities regarding IT management and governance roles. Which of the following recommendations is most appropriate? Okay, so who wants to take the question and break it down for us? Okay, have a go at it, Jonathan.
When auditing the IT governance framework and IT risk management practices that exist within an organization, the IS auditor identified some undefined responsibilities regarding IT management and governance role, which means there's something wrong. They identified wrong things.
Okay.
So which of the following recommendations is most appropriate? In terms of IT management and risk, as far as IT management and governance goals are concerned, what's most important is what we do.
Yeah.
First one, review of the strategic alignment of IT with business. Alignment of strategic alignment of IT with the business could be set aside. Implement accountability rules within the organization. This general practice of the organization. I would say. Ensure that independent IT audits are conducted periodically.
Okay, so why is that one wrong?
So identifying in this, carrying out an IT audit does not resolve the root cause.
Yeah, we've just done an audit.
Yeah.
We've got a finding. We now need to give a recommendation to fix the root cause of the problem we've just found. Saying go and do another audit is not fixing anything. Yeah, it'll just keep finding it and keep finding it. So yeah, so it can't be the right answer. Okay.
At the same time, create a checklist officer of grow in the organization. Still, just adding more people to the job. I'd say, A.
Okay, some other views? Okay, so why are you saying A? Why are you saying B?
B speaks about implementing accountability, and you're looking for the undefined responsibilities.
Okay.
Each
Good.
responsibility should have, each function should have an accountability.
So the roles and responsibilities.
Okay. Jonathan, you're looking at it differently.
Yeah, because I'm assuming that our IT and the other functions of the organization are not aligned. And IT is probably going this way, not properly integrating the rest of the functions.
It's an interesting dilemma, because the one is looking at it, as you're saying, so we've got these undefined roles, which means there's certain things that should be happening and nobody's doing it. And as a result of not doing it, it could cause this IT and business to diverge. The other answer is saying, well, we need to implement some rules around accountability. Now, it could be either. Which one?
Would be most important.
Which one would be most important? Which one would you do first? Okay, so now we seem to sounding like, one of those who wants to be a millionaire. You sure? Final answer. Zubair, what's your view?
Well, I know the answer, so I don't. But just my view.
Yeah.
The thing is, let me explain to you why I had an issue with it. I spoke to him about it. When they say implement accountability rules within the organization, so you're talking about IT governance, IT risk management, IT everything. And then you talk about the entire organization. So I just said, if they said implement accountability rules within the IT organization, within the IT department of the organization, I would automatically put B. But then I just thought that the IS auditor is focusing mainly on the IT section. Why would he go and start calling a whole big thing with the entire? What if it's 1,000, 2,000 man organization? Like, it's not our job to go and tell the entire organization, come and sit here, this is what you need to do, accountability, and whatever it is. I just thought it was specifically for IT. Like, so that's why I didn't get the link. You're auditing the IT department and the IT section of the entire firm.
Yeah.
But now you want to go to the CEO, CFO, MD level and say the organization is lacking accountability. So if they said the IT within the IT section of the organization, the IT related section.
I hear what you're saying, but don't forget the previous discussions we had about saying you can't audit, and you can't consider IT as being this completely isolated function.
Yeah, no, I understand.
If we're doing risk management in IT, it's got to be aligned to the enterprise risk management framework. Okay? If we've got an IT audit plan or IT audit function, it's got to operate within the internal audit function and plan. So everything needs to operate in the framework of that bigger something. So if you look at it and say, well, what are they saying here? We're saying that the IT governance framework and IT risk management practices that exist within the organization, there's some unidentified responsibilities around management and governance roles. Okay? So that's looking again at how do those fit into the broader governance and management roles in the organization. So I don't see too much of a problem from that perspective. Okay? Because it's saying implement accountability rules within the organization. Now, those rules may already have been defined somewhere else and just not implemented within the IT function, or this problem could be a common problem across the whole organization. I would need to look at both of those. Okay.
Because with A, we're saying let's already look at how everything is functioning, and let's find where there's a disagreement.
We are. So how likely is it then that if there are some issues around some undefined responsibilities, Because they're not saying all responsibilities. They're saying there's some undefined responsibilities. Okay. How likely is it that it'll cause that divergence and that split between business and IT? You with me? It's if we're auditing one area of the business. So here we're auditing this IT governance framework and IT risk management practices. So that's the focus of the audit. So if we're looking at that and we're drilling down and we're finding, okay, that some things are defined, there are some roles that are filled, but we find some gaps down here. Okay. If we go back and we re-look at this whole strategic element, then it's almost implying that every time we do an audit of anything, we're going to end up back at the strategic element as soon as we start finding gaps and challenges. So what you're saying is not impossible. It could happen. But is that the first thing that we would necessarily go back and do? I'm not sure. So let's see what they say is the official answer. Okay. So for A, they're saying, while the strategic element of IT with the business is important, it's not directly related to the gap identified in the scenario. So while there is a possibility that the divergence could happen, it's not an immediate consequence of that it's definitely going to happen like that. Okay. So for B, they're saying, IT risk is managed by embedding accountability into the enterprise. The IS auditor should recommend the implementation of accountability rules to ensure that all responsibilities are defined within the organization. It says, note this question asks for the best recommendation, not about the finding itself. Okay.
Basically, we want to find out who will do what, who is responsible for what.
Yeah.
And they will pick it up.
Well, they talk about a recommendation. So not what do we want to further go and audit, but in our report, when we make a recommendation to management, what is it we're going to tell management to do? It's one of those ones where you almost need to.
That is saying the first thing you want to visit from an IT perspective, the same old as IT affect.
Which we do. We do have to do that. Because if we only ever limit ourselves to what's happening within IT, we're not going to fix bigger issues within the organization. Okay. And if you read the first part of the statement there, okay, IT risk is managed by embedding accountability into the enterprise. Okay, you cannot manage IT risk purely from things you do within the IT department, purely from people within the IT department. Okay, you're going to have to be broader than that. You know, every user of computer systems has a role to play within managing of IT risk. Those people don't fit within the IT department necessarily. Okay, okay, let's have a look. It is an interesting one. It's a slightly strange question too, but we're going to get a few of those as we go along. But sometimes, you know, once you've been through all the material and you come back to it, it starts to just make a little bit more sense. If we get too hung up on trying to understand everything now 100%, we're never going to get through the end of it, and you won't have that opportunity to swing back and see what makes more sense later. Now, we do have one viewer who's joined us. I can't see a name here of who it is, and I'm not sure which link they used to join us. So they're not part of the Hangout, but they are watching live. So don't feel offended if we're not talking to you because we don't know who you are.
Showing him the camera.
You can watch it live.
Jonathan wants to say hello, so
Hello.
we're gonna I'll put this question up here, and then I'll flick the camera across so Jonathan can say hello. Oh, we scared them off. Okay, now they're back again.
Dropped internet, but I didn't know we were an audience elsewhere.
No, they can't see you. They can.
But I'll put it on so that they can see you.
She's gonna be like, they can hear what we say.
So that's Jonathan over there.
Hi, guys.
See, so now the camera is on and you're transmitting to the world and it's live on YouTube and everybody can see you. You can go back and watch the YouTube video later. So let's get back to the discussion at hand. Okay.
I hope they're not saying happy this day I asked such a question.
Okay. So the next question, while observing a full simulation of the business continuity plan, an IS auditor notices that the notification systems within the organizational facilities could be severely impacted by an infrastructure damage. The best recommendation the IS auditor can provide to the organization is to ensure. Okay, so let's dissect the question a bit before we start looking at the answers. So you're observing a full simulation. So it's not a desktop exercise or anything like that. This is now, it's a full simulation. So it means all the people are there, they're running through some kind of scenario, they're probably in the building, maybe on a weekend or something, and everybody's running around, okay? So you notice that the notifications system. So what's a notification system? Okay, it's something like the intercom or, I don't know, some kind of announcement PA system or some kind of boards that are up telling people what to do, but some kind of communication type system, okay? So we notice that system could be severely impacted by infrastructure damage, okay? So that means in all likelihood, it's not that robust, it's not that strong. Something could happen, that system could be not working in the event of a disaster. Okay, so the best recommendation we could make to the organization is to ensure. Option A, the salvage team is trained to use the notification system. Well, they probably should be trained to use the notification system, but the whole point of this particular finding is that it's probably not going to work in the event of a disaster. So having them trained to use it is not really going to help us. We need some kind of alternative.
They know the system. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So option B, the notification system provides for a recovery of the backup. Okay, so now we're making the backups dependent on this notification system, which we're saying is not very good in the first place. So that one doesn't seem that great. Okay. Option C, the redundancies are built into the notification system. Yeah, that might help because that will give alternate methods of notification, alternate ways of looking at it. So I would think option C is a good one. Option D, the notification systems are stored in a vault. Well, that's not going to help us because we actually need a way of notifying people, communicating with people. So I'm not sure that having it stored anywhere is going to help us. So when I look at this, hopefully the answer is C, because C looks like the most practical, likely one. Okay. So let's scroll down a little bit and let's see what it actually comes up with. Okay, and the correct answer is C. So what are they saying? Option A, the salvage team will not be able to use a severely damaged notification system, even if they're trained in it. So yeah, that's kind of what we said. The recovery of the backups has no bearing on the notification system, okay. If the notification system has been severely damaged or impacted by the damage, the redundancy would be the best control. Absolutely. Indeed, storing the notification system in a vault is little value if the building is damaged. It's not going to help us, so yeah.
Can you explain redundancy in 30 seconds?
So So redundancy is often explained as if it's a bad thing. Okay, but redundancy doesn't have to be a bad thing. Redundancy is having an extra of something. So your spare wheel in the back of your car, it's redundant. You don't need it. It's an extra. Okay, but it's there in case something goes wrong with the main wheel. Then you take it off and you put the spare on. So that's a positive redundancy. Okay. Negative.
How do you use the word redundant stock? That means dead stock, you know?
Yeah.
Sitting there.
It's something there. It's something there that's doing nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's why I can be positive and negative. So don't always think of it in the negative. If there's too much of that, it could be a negative.
Yeah. Like we fashion that way.
Yeah, very much so.
That's the thing.
Like, now in other words, you can use like fail.
Yeah.
My only point of concern is that they say redundancy is a burst to the notification system.
Yeah.
But you've observed that the notification system could be damaged. So
Yeah.
even if you repeat within something that could be damaged.
Yeah, look, one would have to do it quite carefully.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of putting redundancies in would be to strengthen it and enhance it.
Yeah.
Okay? Often in telecommunications, you talk about a redundant line. Okay? So you've got redundant power supplies. So you've got a building and we want to go and connect it to the local ESCOM substation or something, so we put a line there. Okay, when you put your redundant line in, you don't go and put it in the same trench in the ground. You can find an alternate route to an alternate substation. So if the one blows up or goes down, you've got the redundant one to use. But you're 100% correct. If you don't put it in exactly the same trench, well, when the one blows up, it'll probably blow the other one up with it, and then it's useless.
Yeah.
So you have to apply some thinking behind it and some planning behind it. Okay.
I was also thinking of redundancy in the sense that there are certain times, certain circumstances where, suppose a system crashes, right? And there's very confidential information or data that we don't want in the wrong hands. There's probably like a certain application that renders the whole system so that no one can go in to check on it.
That's a different meaning of the word redundant.
Yeah.
That's why, yeah. Like you mean lock it down.
Yeah, lock it down. No one can use it.
Fail safe, what do you call it? Something like that.
Is there a definition in the book of what they mean by the word redundant?
Redundancy is generally
Yeah.
redundancy 231.
I think you would be better with the book.
Because the only question.
Yeah, even to 35.
So there's nothing there that tells us much. Okay.
There's no definition.
I'll Google it for you now. Okay, so there's a couple of parts of the definition with completely different meanings.
Yeah, that's
Okay. So they talk about the state of being not or no longer needed or useful. Okay, so that's where your redundant stock comes into it. It's not needed, it's not useful anymore. Okay, and probably the more not useful part of it. Okay, because you can't sell it, it's not worth anything. Okay. When you then look at the British definition that they give there, the state of being no longer in employment because there's no more work. So in other words, you're being made redundant.
no.
Okay. Then they give the engineering definition, which is the more useful one to ask.
Yeah.
Okay. The inclusion of extra components which are not strictly necessary to functioning in case of failure in other components. Now that's the key one. That
That's what I
is the
learned
one.
now.
Okay. So that's why these sessions are useful. You learn at least one thing today. Okay. So when you look at that definition, everything makes sense in terms of the answer.
Yeah. But like initially when I read that, I didn't know what that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
What meant something else. That's good.
Let's see. Okay, so let's have a look then at our next question. Oopsie, I've gone too far. Close your eyes. Okay, now we need to zoom out a bit as well. So you're going to have to keep closing your eyes until I get the zoom out.
Yeah, that's right.
We struggle to get some of these questions to fit on the page. So we're using Paint to kind of move across quite liberally. Where's this thing going now? That's the one thing we didn't take into account, is all the different sizing of these things. Okay. Here we go. So what have we got here? A medium-sized organization whose IT disaster and recovery measures have been in place and regularly tested for years has just developed a formal business continuity plan. Okay. Not that unusual in the sense that, IT's been having DR for ages. They've got all their stuff down pat. Business has finally woken up and realized we need some BCP, so they started putting some BCP in place. Okay. A basic BCP tabletop exercise has been successfully performed. Okay. Which testing should an IS auditor recommend be performed next to verify the adequacy of the new BCP? Okay. So what are we going to do after we've done the tabletop exercise? That's what they're asking. So A, the full-scale test with relocation of all departments, including IT, to the contingency site. Okay. It's an option. We have to do that at some point. Option B, walkthrough test of a series of predefined scenarios with all critical personnel involved. Okay. Again, yeah, we probably want to do that at some point, and we probably want to do that before we go into the full-scale test. So this looks like one of those ones where there's a whole lot of right answers and we need to put them in order. Okay. Option C, IT disaster and recovery test with business departments involved in testing the critical applications. Nah. Okay, it's asking us what's the next step in testing the BCP, not the DR. And they've told us the DR is fairly well tested and defined in that. So option C we can exclude.
So we've come up with the basic BCP.
Yeah.
We have it now.
Yeah.
So we're looking for the next step.
So we've come up with the basic BCP. We've done a tabletop test. Okay. Now we need to know what the next test is.
Tabletop, it means like
Theoretical.
Yeah,
So you sit around a boardroom table and you have the document and you talk about it. Okay, who would do this? Who would do this? Okay. So
because the disaster recovery plan has been tested for years and it's fine.
yeah. Okay. So then option D, a functional test of a scenario with limited IT involvement. Okay. So now, if you eliminate C and you have to order D, B, and A in terms of the order in which you will do these things. Okay. So we've done the tabletop test. Okay. The last thing we do would probably be the full-scale test. Okay. So that put A at the bottom of the list. So then between B and D, now, so basically eliminated B for us. Okay, so that,
But you would think to go for that walkthrough, yeah.
You know why, when you think of a walkthrough in audit is the
First thing you do.
but look at the last part of that walkthrough statement.
With critical personnel involved.
All critical personnel. So there's a lot of people involved in that. Okay, and as soon as you're involving a lot of people in a test, it's expensive and disruptive to business. So you do that further down the line. So the most disruptive would be option A. Okay, B is then the next most disruptive one, and D is less disruptive. So you would normally do them in that kind of order. Okay. So let's see what they say. Yeah, correct answer is D.
That's just one scenario.
Okay, and look at the answer to B as well, because there's something interesting that they mention in there about the intent. Okay, the walkthrough test is a basic type of testing. Its intention is to make key staff familiar with the plan and discuss critical elements rather than verifying its adequacy. So it's not intended to test adequacy. So that actually means, by all rights, when we were discussing B, we should have eliminated it because it's not the purpose. It doesn't match what was required. Okay. So they're saying D, after tabletop exercise has been performed, the next step would be a functional test, which includes the mobilization of staff to exercise. Okay, I think we've cut off part of the answer. Okay, but yeah.
At least we know why the others are not.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable with that? Jonathan not looking so
So was
comfortable.
adequacy mentioned in the question? About
Let's go back and look what it's saying.
why they talk about verifying the adequacy?
To verify the adequacy.
Adequacy, they do say adequacy.
Yeah, so walkthrough is not fine. We know, yeah, we should just verify.
Well, you see, if you look at it from an auditing perspective, okay,
Then how does it become?
walkthrough does often be used to test adequacy of design. And then you go and do your full sample testing to test effectiveness. Okay, so it's not quite as cut and dried as it sounds. But I think even when looking at all of that, D is definitely the most correct
The
answer.
least number of people.
Yeah.
Maybe we just remember that.
So we're going stage by stage.
Yeah, you get more people in each stage. Yeah, you don't plan the order.
But the moment you see the first two, then you know that they both right.
Well, as soon as they say most appropriate, okay,
Yeah.
it means there's going to be more than one appropriate, and it means you're going to have to make selections between them. So you are going to have to order them.
Yeah, see, we didn't, I didn't keep in my head.
That you, yeah, you got to order it and you see it like that.
We need to keep our mind
Eliminate the unnecessary ones and then order the rest.
Yeah.
clear now.
And for me, I mean, following this out of going for A, because I would say we're testing for adequacy. And we want to make sure the system will work.
Well, but remember,
So let's go full scale.
you've got adequacy and you've got effectiveness. Adequacy is normally looking at the design. Okay, and you're not going to do a full-scale test to test adequacy. Only once you're saying the design is adequate would you do a full-scale test to confirm that it's effective.
Now that's more effective testing, yeah. A will be more for effective testing, not for adequate, not for design. More for implementation, effectiveness.
Okay, so close your eyes. I've been zooming out when I need to be zooming in. Okay. So, an IS auditor performing an audit of the risk assessment process. So we're auditing the risk assessment process. Should first confirm. So there's a couple of things. There's probably more than one right answer, but which one do we need to do first? Okay. So we've got to confirm that reasonable threats to the information assets are identified. Okay, you've given us a hint that that's wrong, so that's okay. But, you know, before you can identify the threats, what have you got to identify? Because you're saying you're identifying the threats to the assets, but you can't do that unless you've identified the assets. So that answer in itself tells us that we need to have done something before we can do that. Okay, so we know the assets must come first before that. Technical and organizational vulnerabilities have been analyzed. That's further down the line. Can't do that first. Assets have been identified and ranked. Yeah, well, so far that's the one that comes first. D, the effects of potential security breaches have been evaluated. No, you can't do that. You've got to identify your assets before you can do that. Okay, so I would go with C. And you can come to that just by reading what's there and with a small understanding of what it is that we're looking for. Okay, and thankfully it's the right answer. It'd be terrible to give a detailed explanation and then find out that's not the right answer. And that wouldn't be the first time that's happened.
You know which is the wrong answer.
Okay, so what they're saying, threats facing each of the organization's assets should be analyzed according to the value. This would occur after identifying and ranking assets, which is what we said. Analyzing how these weaknesses and the absence of mitigating controls would impact the organization's information assets would occur after the assets and weaknesses have been identified. So you can see they're pretty much ordering it. Identification and ranking of information assets, example, data criticality, sensitivity, locations of assets, will set the tone or scope of how to assess risk in relation to the organizational value of assets. So yeah, we've got to do that one first. Okay, and then the effect of security breaches is dependent on the value of the assets and the threats and vulnerabilities and effectiveness of mitigating controls. So that's looking at the overall thing. Okay, so that one's reasonably okay. Let's see what we come up with next. The output of the risk management process is an input for making what? Business plans, audit charters, security policy decisions, software design decisions. Okay. Okay, so we've got one answer here, business plans. Okay, Jonathan? Okay. Yeah, I think your overall risk management process is more than just a technical something or other. Okay, you're identifying all the business assets, and you're looking at the threats, and you're looking at the criticality of those assets, and then you're going to look at where your residual risk is, and then you need to make some business decisions. Okay? And those business decisions you would then document in business plans. So I would have preferred to see an answer saying business decisions, but nonetheless, I still think business plans is probably the next one. You know, it may still have an impact on some of those other things. Okay, so software design decisions, could a risk assessment have an impact on a software design decision? It may. Okay, but business plans is probably the more level. Yeah. So let's see.
Whoa.
Okay. Whoa. So your answer is correct. Yes. See what happens when you talk about making a fool of yourself. Okay, so let's go through and see what they say. Making a business plan is not the ultimate goal of the risk management process. Okay, that's fair enough. Doesn't, yeah, okay. Risk management can help create the audit plan, but not the audit charter. Okay. Risk management process is about making specific security-related decisions, such as the level of acceptable risk. Okay. D, risk management will drive the design of security controls and software, but influencing security policy is more important. Okay.
Because I think when we carry out a business, sorry, risk assessment, we come up with specifics.
Yeah. Risks, you generally find what you're vulnerable to and how to counter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those things are specific. And that goes for, that relates now to specific security policy.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the end, do this management so that we can narrow down our focus on to what we are going
Yeah, look, I don't want to confuse things by bringing other elements into it, but you know, one makes risk assessments in order to I don't want to have circular logic either, but to understand the risk profile and understand risk, okay? Because you can over control something as well as under control something. But yeah, I think the way they write it is fair enough. I can't argue with the logic that's written there. Okay, that making a business plan is not the ultimate goal of the risk management process. Okay, which is true. You have a business plan to achieve certain business objectives, and you want to do that in spite of the risk that might be around there, and you manage the risk to allow you to achieve your business plan. You don't do the risk assessment to define the business plan, which is very much true. So one can't argue with that. And yes, C is then the more appropriate answer, and that it will influence your security policy decisions. Okay.
I think from time to time we've already got in that dilemma, whether to think of the position of an IS auditor or to think as just a general business manager. You know, just a management decision or it's an auditing decision.
The same concept, but with to save lives in the question, we do look at the risk.
Yeah.
People's lives are always more important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would look at it from an auditor, you would look at the risk.
Yeah.
And that's why we do more and more of these questions, to get more into that, almost into that zone, into that groove of getting these things right. So let's go down to the next one. Okay, so now we know we need to think about this more carefully. So the goal of IT risk analysis is to A, enable the alignment of IT risk management with enterprise risk management. B, enable the prioritization of risk response. C, satisfy legal and regulatory compliance requirements. D, identify known threats and vulnerabilities to information assets.
Hey, you was thinking about am I right? The first comes first.
So what's the goal of risk analysis? Why do we do risk analysis? Is it to enable the alignment of IT risk management and enterprise risk management? I can't see that being the case. It's almost like a side effect. When you're doing your IT risk analysis, you should be aligning with the ERM, because if they're misaligned, you're going to have problems in reporting and dealing with it. But it's not the goal of doing it. It's not like we say, well, we're doing this because we want to align to ERM. That can never be the reason for doing it. I hope. Okay, next one. Do we do risk analysis to enable the prioritization of risk responses? Could be. Because there's lots of different responses you can have to risk, and we can't do all of them. We've got limited resources, so we need to understand the highest risk areas so that we can do some kind of prioritization of risk responses. It seems a completely reasonable answer. To satisfy legal and regulatory compliance requirements. Again, that's a side effect. There may be a legal and regulatory compliance requirement to do this, but it's not the only reason we're doing it. We've got to be doing it for more than just legal requirements. Okay, D, identify known threats and vulnerabilities to information assets. I'm not so sure about the known. Okay. We'll probably still need to document known threats, but we might also want to think outside the box a little bit and potentially identify some unknown ones. But that can't be the end goal. Identifying them and doing nothing about them is useless. So there's got to be a longer term end goal to this thing. So I would choose B because that's got a sensible long term end goal compared to all the others. Anybody got any different views?
Yeah, I'll also go for B and because once we rank this case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things you do. It's in terms of risk to the business, perhaps. It's perhaps in terms of the cost of the response, the residual risks, all those things. Okay, so nervously I click the button to see what the answer is. And the answer is B. So let's have a look at what they're saying for these things. So, it's cut off. So aligning IT risk management with enterprise risk management is important to ensure cost effectiveness of the overall risk management process. However, risk analysis does not enable such an alignment. True. Okay. Risk analysis is a process by which the likelihood magnitude of scenario estimated risk analysis is conducted to ensure that the information assets with the greatest risk, likelihood, and impact are managed before addressing risk with the lower likelihood and impact. Prioritization of IT risk helps maximize the return on investment for risk response. And that's pretty much what we discussed. C, risk analysis evaluates risk on the basis of likelihood and impact and includes financial, environment, regulatory, and other. It looks at regulatory risk as being one of the types, but not specifically designed to satisfy just that. Okay, so that all looks fair enough. Okay, so let's go down to the next question. Okay. An organization having a number of offices across a wide geographic area has developed a DR plan. Using actual resources, which of the following is the most cost-effective test of the disaster recovery plan? Okay, so let's understand this. So an organization has a number of offices spread across a wide geographical area. So that could be across the country, across the world. So they've developed a disaster recovery plan. Now they want to use actual resources. And which of the following is the most cost-effective test of the plan? So what are we trying to do? Reduce cost. But have a cost-effective plan. Okay. So a full operational test. Okay, that's highly costly, so we'll eliminate that one. A preparedness test. Could be. A paper test. Okay, so Zubair's given us the answer to say that's not the answer. An immigration test.
What's that?
See, immigration test is not a DR test as far as I'm aware. When you're doing program changes or application changes and upgrades, immigration test will try and make sure that something that you don't miss a situation where something used to work and that doesn't work anymore. So you've kind of gone backwards in terms of functionality or something like that. So that's your immigration testing. Okay. So looking at
Yeah.
so you've regressed in some way. So my application had this problem. I fixed it. Now we've changed something else. Suddenly that problem's back again. Okay. I'll probably have a better description of it when we scroll down. But that's my kind of understanding of it. So on the basis of those, then, preparedness test looks the most reasonable there. Okay. Now, why would a paper test not be the right answer? Maybe you want to tell us that since you've read the answers. See if you can remember. So you chose paper test. Paper test could be the cheapest way of doing it. Tabletop paper test, same kind of thing, I'm thinking.
This is using actual resources.
Okay. And they're spread around the world using actual resources. So to fly them all together, to have a paper test, may actually even end up costing you more. Okay. But if there was only one office and they're all sitting together in the same place, then maybe that's sort of an answer. Let's see what they say. Okay, correct answer is B. So a full operational test is conducted after the paper and preparedness test and still quite expensive. Okay. The preparedness test is performed by each local office or area to test the adequacy of the preparedness of the local operations for disaster recovery. Okay, so it's that decentralized nature of the preparedness test and of what they gave us in the question that links up there. A paper test is a structured walkthrough of the disaster recovery plan and should be conducted before the preparedness test, but a paper test, that desktop or desk check, is not sufficient to test the viability of the plan. Okay. A regression test is not a disaster recovery plan test and is used in software development and maintenance. Okay. So in the next chapter, chapter 3, where we talk about software development and that whole build versus buy stuff, regression testing will come up a little bit more over there. Okay. So this is another one of those questions where by the time you get to the end of chapter 5 and you come back, you would know what a regression test is and isn't, and it would help you to answer this question. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, fine. I'm not going to try and hide it now that I've showed you all the answers. Okay, so which of the factors should an IS auditor primarily focus on when determining the appropriate level of protection for an information asset? So you said relative value to the business, and I think that's part of it, but it's perhaps the starting point of it. Okay. Because I think we discussed this question or a similar one last week. Yeah, we said, you look at an asset for an organization. If you've got a huge farm of a couple of 100,000 hectares, okay, it's your biggest value asset, but it may not necessarily be what you need to protect or you need to check out. What's the risk of that piece of land being stolen, being damaged, being this, being that? Probably very little. Okay, but maybe you've got a processing plant that sits in the middle of that land and you want to put a fence around that, an alarm there, and have a guard dog because if that got damaged, even though it's much lower value relative to the land, there's a much higher risk of something happening there. So that's where you look at the overall residual risk when you take into account the value of the asset and the threats against it, what you've got in place to protect it. Okay. Okay, let's try and scroll a little bit slower this time. So, integrating the business continuity plan into IT project management helps in what? So option A, we know it's wrong. It's the testing of the business continuity requirements. Option B, the development of a more comprehensive set of requirements. Option C, development of a transaction flow chart. Option D, ensuring the application meets the user's needs. Okay. So we've got BCP, we've got project management. Project management is about new projects that we're doing, new things we're implementing or building or doing within the organization. Okay. Testing of the business continuity requirements is not really going to help us by integrating the BCP into that. If we've got the business continuity plan and we know it's required by the business continuity plan and we're developing something new for the organization, that could give us a more comprehensive set of requirements and tell us what new requirements there might be. Because if we ignore the BCP and we do this whole new thing, and afterwards we test the BCP, now the BCP fails because we didn't take into account what's needed for the BCP. So B is certainly an option. C, the development of a transaction flow chart. I don't see how that's even related. D, ensuring the application meets the user's needs. Also, not really, because your immediate needs may not take BCP into account. Your long-term needs, when the power fails or something goes wrong, you might certainly decide that's one of your needs, but it's a little bit more indirect. So I would probably go with B first, and then D would be a lower option, but I'm interested to hear from the man over here who got it right last time. Any contrary votes? No? Let's have a look what they say.
Likely.
Correct answer is B. So saying a BCP will not directly address the detailed processing needs of users. So that's why it's not D. So it does, but it's not direct. Okay. B, integrating the BCP into the development process ensures complete coverage of requirements for each phase of the project. Okay, that makes sense. You don't want to break your BCP by something new that you're doing. Let's just see this. Okay. This looks like an interesting one. Okay, so what's happening here? After the merger of two organizations, multiple self-developed legacy applications from both organizations are to be replaced by a new common platform. Which of the following would be the greatest risk? So somebody tell us about what's happening here.
Organizations as well, and they had two legacy applications.
Okay. Okay, so talk a little bit about self-developed legacy applications. What kind of organizations are using those?
Banks.
Okay, and tell us a bit more about why people use self-developed legacy applications.
The industry begin like off-the-shelf some applications don't meet their specific requirements.
So it's kind of highly customized. It's tailored to the way they do things. They're often quite possessive and proud of these things.
They probably invest a lot of money also.
Oh, so they don't want to chuck it out. They think it's the right thing for them. So you, maybe not necessarily, but yeah. Okay, so there's a whole lot of emotional factors that come into play here. Okay, so which of the following statements then would be the greatest risk? So it comes back to having to do some kind of ordering. Okay. Project management and progress reporting is combined in a project management office which is driven by external consultants. Okay, you know, could be. It's not that uncommon. You've got a new project that's running. You've got people in the business who are already doing day-to-day jobs. You bring in consultants to provide expert project management skill and to set up a project management office. See it all over the place. So that's not that unusual. Okay. and they're doing project management and they're doing progress reporting, well, often that's the case. Your project managers give you the progress reports. You still want some kind of internal audit involvement to give you an independent view, but the primary reporting is done by the project managers. So that in itself is not necessarily a big problem. So there's a couple of things in there which could be slight issues, but nothing that's too big an issue. So option B, the replacement effort consists of several independent projects. Okay, so already you can see there's some complications. Without integrating resource allocation in a portfolio management approach. Okay, that's dangerous. So I'm the project management running my project, and I think you're going to be working for me tomorrow doing some testing. You're running a project, and you think this is going to be with you tomorrow doing that. Okay, you can see all sorts of conflict and stuff's going to happen here. Things won't happen on time. It's not going to deliver. Okay. Option C, the resources of each of the organizations are inefficiently allocated while they are being familiarized with the other company's legacy systems. Yeah, so it might be some inefficiencies there, but it doesn't sound like complete failure. D, the new platform will force the business areas of both organizations to change their work process. I think that goes without saying. It would have to happen. Two different systems, two different organizations, two different business processes. At least one of them is going to have to change. Probably meets halfway in the middle somewhere. Okay. So now we've got to choose. B. Okay, so now you need to choose the second choice. You got saved by Zubair. Zubair, do you know what the answer is? What do they say? The effort should be consolidated to ensure alignment with the overall strategy of the post-merger organization. If resource allocation is not separate, the separate projects are at risk of overestimating the availability of key knowledge resources for the in-house developed legacy applications. Okay. Makes sense. During a review of a business continuity plan, you didn't like business continuity today. During a review of a business continuity plan, an IS auditor noticed that the point at which a situation is declared to be a crisis has not been defined. Okay. The major risk associated with that is, so before even reading those answers there, what's the problem if you don't know when it's a crisis? Can't declare is an emergency. Okay. So that's a big thing. And what else about it? Okay, you don't know what actions to take, yeah. When to take them, yeah. So it's quite a challenge because you've got all these wonderful plans, and you've got some guy sitting at the factory gate or sitting in the office or somewhere, and now there's a fire, and he's thinking, oh, is this a small fire or is it a big fire? Should I grab a fire extinguisher and put it out myself? Do I call the fire brigade? Do I call the BCP people? What do I do? And then, 3 days later, the factory's burned down. Everybody's going, why didn't you call us? And he's going, well, I didn't know I had to. So people are going to be in a panic situation, and they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to make the wrong decisions. The more you can have those things defined up front, the less room for error there is in the whole process. Okay, so let's see what it says. Assessment of the situation may be delayed. Absolutely, it may be delayed. Execution of the disaster recovery plan could be impacted. 100% it'll be impacted. Notification of teams might not occur. Yeah, that could happen as well. Potential crisis recognition might be delayed. Yeah, that could happen as well. So all of those things could happen. Okay, so which one is the biggest risk? B? Okay. I'm agreeing with you. Why are you saying B?
if we don't do certain things at a certain point,
Mhm.
then we do not need to do it at all. We are useless to implement the plan if it's gone way, way beyond.
Okay, I'm with you on that.
Not behavior.
But there's a difference. So assess the answers. Okay, dissect the answers now. So have a look at A, have a look at B, have a look at C, have a look at D. Okay. So A, assessment of the situation. That's that up front. Okay. B, execution of the plan. That's like at the end. Okay. C, notification if the teams might not occur. Okay, you notify the team so they get there so you can execute the plan. Okay. That's also something that's more towards the front end. D, potential crisis recognition might be delayed. That's also towards the front end of this thing. Okay. So there's a whole lot of front end things that need to happen in order for the plan to be executed. Okay. So what's the risk? The risk is that one of these front end things don't happen and the plan doesn't get executed. So if you start to order those things, the major risk is that the plan doesn't get executed. So I would go with B on that basis. So agreeing with what you were saying, Jonathan, maybe the kind of thinking to get to the answer is slightly different, but you spotted it anyway. So let's see what they say. Correct answer is B. The execution of the business continuity plan and disaster recovery plans would be impacted if the organization does not know when to declare a crisis. That's also interesting. So for A, they're saying problem and severity assessment would provide information necessary in declaring a disaster, but the lack of a crisis declaration point would not delay the assessment. That's true, because you do the assessment before you declare. We actually didn't read the question necessarily in enough detail. Because what I was saying about ordering those actions, you do all these things. Okay, so you assess the situation, you notify that you do all these things to get to the declaration point to say, is it or isn't it, and then you execute. So with A, not knowing that declaration point is not going to affect your assessment. Let's see what they say about C. After a potential crisis is recognized, the teams responsible for crisis management need to be notified. Delaying the declaration of a disaster would impact or negate the effect of having response teams, but this is only one part of the larger impact. And then D, potential crisis recognition is the first step in recognizing and responding and would occur prior to declaration of disaster. So that order is important. And we could have made our lives a little easier if we read that little statement in the question that was there as a clue for us. We still got the right answer. Okay. I've gone too far again. Oh well. In an organization where an IT security baseline has been defined, an IS auditor should first ensure that A, implementation, B, compliance, C, documentation, D, sufficiency. Okay. So that could be something like a technical standard, configuration standard. So in most organizations, when they start to reach a level of maturity, they will have baselines for almost all the platforms that they use. So if you're building a new Windows server, you go and get the server baseline and you configure it according to that. And then you measure compliance to the baseline after you've configured it, and you continue to measure compliance over time, and you report non-compliance. Okay. So if you're the IT auditor, and they've defined the security baseline, before you go and test the implementation of the baseline, you've got to look at the baseline and say, well, is it sufficient for the organization's needs? Is it based on some kind of international standard? So testing implementation and testing compliance are kind of similar. So has it been implemented and are they compliant to the baseline? Documentation, yeah, at some point it needs to be documented. It's very difficult to test something if it's not documented. And then testing sufficiency, yeah. Is the thing sufficient to meet the needs of the organization? So again, this is one of those kind of ordering type things. The documentation is the tricky one. So if I tell you, okay, we've got a Windows standard, okay, and Microsoft tell you that there are 350 configurable items on Windows, and my Windows standard has got 5 items on it. You might conclude that this is not really sufficient to meet the needs of the organization, and that I'm actually going to be wasting my time testing whether or not that thing's been implemented or not. And within an organization as well, there's normally different people responsible for different things. Okay. So you might have some kind of security type function, and the security function might define what that baseline is. And then you've got an administrator who's going to take that baseline and go and implement it on a particular server. Okay. And the administrators get highly, highly annoyed when you go and tell them that they've done something wrong because the baseline's not up to scratch. Okay. They'll kind of say, not my problem. Here's the baseline. It's been approved somewhere in the organization, and my job is just to take this baseline and implement it. So step one is to take the baseline, check it out. Is it sufficient? If it's not, go and deal with the security people. If the baseline's okay, then we go and check what the admins have been doing and make sure it's been implemented. Okay. Okay, let's scroll a bit more slowly this time. Try to get it back. There we go. Okay. Which of the following is the greatest risk of an inadequate policy definition for ownership of data and systems? Okay, so we're looking for greatest risk. So there's more than one that'll be a risk. Inadequate policy definition for ownership of data and systems. So it either means we don't have a policy or the policy is not good enough. And it's covering ownership of data and ownership of systems. Okay. So let's look at the first one. User management coordination does not exist. User management could be impacted because approval for access to data and systems is normally by the system owner, but in a lot of organizations it's also signed off by their manager. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't exist because there's inadequate policy definition. B, specific user accountability cannot be established. Cannot is a very strong word. And accountability is around who's done what. If you had strong logging in place, that would be able to tell you who's done what. So you could still hold users accountable, even if you didn't have that ownership of data and systems. So that's not quite true. Option C, unauthorized users may have access to originate, modify, or delete data. That's a possibility, because if there's no system owner or no data owner and there's nobody reviewing to see who's got access to what, and the managers are signing it off and the data owners aren't, so C is looking the most likely so far. D, audit recommendations may not be implemented. It's also a possibility, because normally you try and give your audit recommendations to the system owner or the data owner. If you can't find that owner, nobody wants to take it, and nobody's going to do anything about it. But but then you normally just hand it over to the audit committee or the CFO, and somebody gets jumped on, and eventually, somebody fixes something. So C is the most direct, greatest risk that I would see in place. But yeah. What's everybody thinking? Okay. And the answer C. Without a policy defining who's the responsibility for granting access to specific systems, there's an increased risk that individuals could gain or be given system access when they should not have authorization. The ability of unauthorized users being able to modify data is greater than the risk of unauthorized user accounts not being controlled properly. So that aligns to what we were saying. I think we're nearly at the end of this set, and then we can have a look at the questions that Catherine sent through. Okay. A financial enterprise has had difficulties establishing clear responsibilities between its IT strategic committee and its IT steering committee. Okay, so what's the strategic committee do and what's the steering committee do? Start reading what's here. Who's more senior than the other one? Okay, so strategic sets the strategy, and steering committee should be dealing with more operational type things. The strategic committee should have more business representation, and the steering committee would be more technical IT type representation. Yeah, so the strategy tells you where you want to go, and the steering must get you there. So strategy is saying go to Cape Town, and don't go via Joburg and Bloemfontein. And the steering committee must drive us there. Okay. So which of the following responsibilities would most likely be assigned to the steering committee? Okay.
So E is immediately out.
Aligning IT to business objectives should be part of the strategy.
Yeah.
Okay.
D, I think also.
Promoting IT governance practices should start from the top.
Yeah, out.
Okay.
The other two we want to come down.
So then advising an IT compliance risk or approving IT project plans and budgets. Yeah, you see, IT project plans and budgets is really the tactical level stuff that we were talking about earlier. Okay. So the IT steering committee, yeah, they should be doing that kind of stuff, I would think.
And then C.
See, advising on compliance risk. Yeah, that's a strange one. Is that the function of either of those two?
Well, maybe that's why most like this, right?
Yeah, because if I had to choose between those and say, well, which of the two do you think is most likely the function of the IT steering committee? Approving IT projects and budgets or advising on IT compliance risk? I'd be going, well, A is more aligned to what they should be doing. C is probably more like a IT risk function or somebody else's job. Okay. So let's see what they say. Correct answer is A. What do they say about C? Issues relating to compliance are tasks usually assigned to strategy. Steering could be more involved in approval and monitoring individual projects and budgets. Yeah, so it's not misaligned to that. Okay. On the exam, you've got to get these all right now. So an organization has just completed its annual risk assessment. Regarding the business continuity plan, what should an IS auditor recommend as the next step for the organization?
How many BCP ones we are on?
So what are we saying? An organization has just completed its annual risk assessment. So that's the context. Okay. Then regarding the business continuity plan, what should an IS auditor recommend as the next step for the organization? Okay. Sure, this is a tough one because I read those two statements and I've struggled to find the link between the two.
Between the risk assessment and
So-
the business continuity.
So we've just done a risk assessment, and now they're asking us what's
The
the next step for the organization based on the business continuity plan. I'm thinking, well, they haven't told me anything about the business continuity plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So,
the question itself.
so review and evaluate the business continuity plan for adequacy. Yeah, maybe there's something that came out of the risk assessment that impacts on the business continuity plan. I suppose it's possible. Perform a full simulation of the business continuity plan. I don't see how completing a risk assessment should make me go into a full business continuity plan simulation.
That would be the fourth step out of 4, the last step. You have to write
Train
it
and
in
educate
order.
employees regarding the business continuity plan. Well, maybe, but that's also something that you should be doing through the whole period. Notify critical contacts in the business continuity plan. I don't think so.
What's the order if it rank those anyway, without looking at the question?
A.
Like you said, perform full scale.
That's last.
Yeah, that's last.
The first would be,
A.
See, I'm looking at those saying which of these could be tied to or influenced by the risk assessment. Okay, not what's the order in which one would do that.
right.
I'm kind of going that, your full scale simulation of the business continuity plan, that's something that needs a whole lot of planning, and you should be planning it months in advance. You'd be planning it like 6-8 months in advance. You're not going to suddenly declare it because now I've done a risk assessment. So I'd be going, I don't want to fiddle with that timing, so I'm not going to change that. Train and educate employees regarding the BCP. That's almost ongoing. I'm not going to suddenly do that because I've done that. Notify critical contacts in the business continuity plan. Notify them of what? Hey guys, I've just done a risk assessment. Like, it doesn't really gel. Review and evaluate the business continuity plan for adequacy. Perhaps if we've identified some new risks and we want to know if the BCP deals with these risks, then perhaps there's something there. But that's about the only part of it that kind of makes any sense. So let's see. Okay, correct answer is A. The business continuity plan should be reviewed every time a risk assessment is completed for the organization. Okay.
Because I was thinking, A is part of the risk assessment process. They would have figured that out when they did the risk assessment. That this
Whether
process.
the BCP is adequate.
Yeah.
It's also possible. See, the risk assessment, you're often looking at a whole lot of different areas of the risk universe in a relatively short space of time. So it could be based on discussion rather than necessarily some kind of detailed evaluation. So you get 20 people in a room for half a day and you do the risk assessment. And you could bring various inputs and things into there, but it's unlikely that you would, in that risk assessment session, necessarily be going and looking at all those individual items. But that's normally just the start of a longer process. You're saying, okay, well, now we've identified some risks, now we've got to identify controls and mitigations and come up with actions and manage the actions through, and it becomes a whole long, ongoing process in itself. So yeah, that's the end of your ones. Thank you for sharing with us. Okay, now we've got questions that Catherine sent through to us. Okay, so I'm gonna have to close eyes a little bit while I try and scroll and zoom into all those things. So I've really messed that one up and given the answer, but let's look at it anyway. Which of the following is the most critical for the successful implementation and maintenance of a security policy? Okay. So, option A, assimilation of the framework and intent of a written security policy by all appropriate parties. B, management support and approval for the implementation and maintenance of the policy. C, enforcement of security rules by providing punitive actions. and D, stringent implementation, monitoring, enforcement of the rules by the Security Office through access control software. Okay, so all of those things are things which could and should happen. Okay, and the answer that Catherine chose was management support and approval for implementation and maintenance, which is important because without that, things never going to work. But say most critical for the successful implementation.
What's assimilation?
So
That word automatically was still here. I don't know what that means. Lots of vocabulary.
so assimilation is like absorbing it and understanding it, and yeah, but actually getting to grips with it and what it means and practically what it means and how it should be used and the like. Okay.
Like we had when we're discussing the DRP, like simulation, like when
It's more than that.
As opposed to actually doing it, you go through it, a discussion, simulating, see.
It's more than just a simulation. So let's go here. Okay. So if you look at that definition, the process by which a person or persons acquire the social and psychological characteristics of a group. Waves of immigrants have been assimilated into the American culture.
Like
So
blending in.
it's like blending in, and it's making it become
Chameleon.
part of them, and it becomes ingrained into them. Okay, so if you can get your security policy ingrained into your people, that's the best possible
Yeah.
outcome.
No, they understand the word.
Okay, so when you look at it, then I mean, few organizations actually get it right, where the framework and intent of the written security policy is assimilated by all appropriate parties. Okay, that's like almost this nirvana state. So absolutely, that would be the best possible option. It's difficult to actually achieve that, but nonetheless, it would be the best thing if we could get them to do that.
everyone has gotten a hold of it,
Yeah.
aware.
And they understand it and believe in it, and they do it every day. Okay, so what do they say? Simulation of the framework intent of the security policy by the users of the system is critical to the successful implementation and maintenance. And then they just explain the other things, but they don't go further on that. But yeah,
The next one we've done.
the goal of risk analysis is to
Prioritization of risk response.
enable the prioritization of risk responses. Well remembered. Okay, so we had that question earlier. Okay, so you weren't, so feel better, you weren't the only one who got it wrong. Okay.
You said D.
I said, yeah.
D.
So let's I want to try and zoom this in a bit. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. So Zubair, you want to read it? I think I'm losing my voice.
A team conducting a risk analysis is having difficulty projecting the financial losses that could result from a risk. To evaluate the potential losses, the team should A is compute the amortization of the related assets, B is calculate a return on investment, C is apply a qualitative approach, and D is spend the time needed to define exactly the loss amount. Difficulty in projecting the losses. So you go to see that, I think, qualitative.
So what's a quantitative and what's a qualitative?
Apply qualitative on view because it doesn't deal with exact numbers, because they have a problem. Quantitative is that
So quantitative means trying to put it into numbers and
Yeah.
do calculations around it. Qualitative
It's prioritized.
is kind of talking more around it and using non-numerical methods to still come up with an answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes an interesting one, because it's, so going with the qualitative approach would kind of be saying, okay, I accept that I can't come up with a number for this thing, so if I get trying to come up with a number, let's put some words around this thing that makes sense to everyone. Okay, so if you go through the other one, so calculate the return of investment, yeah, that's more about an asset, less about a risk. Okay, compute, and if they can't put a value to this thing, I don't know how you're going to calculate that. Compute the amortization of the related assets. That's not really going to help us either. Spend the time needed to define exactly the loss amount. Okay, that sounds like a lost cause. So I'd go with C. Purely, it's almost the odd one out. It's kind of accepting that we might not be able to calculate something.
and
And the answer is C. The common practice when it's difficult to calculate the financial loss is to take a qualitative approach in which the manager affected by the risk defines the financial loss in terms of a weighted factor of some kind. Okay, and then they go on to explain the other options. Okay. Everybody happy with that? Now, let me see if I can scroll across and fit this in. Otherwise, I'll have to zoom the other way again. Ah, damn. Okay. Which of the following is the best indicator of IT alignment with organizational strategies and objectives? Okay, so a well-defined enterprise architecture. Established policy compliance metrics. Results of a business process owner survey. The findings of internal control assessment. This is a tricky one.
IT alignment with
Organizational strategies and objectives.
Looking before average.
Goodness. Okay, I'm hearing B. So we know it's not A, simply because that was the one that was marked as incorrect. You're saying B. Other answers? D. You're saying C or D. Okay, so we've got a wide variety of answers here.
I agree. Like your policies come from higher up, like strategic level.
Okay.
Compliance you're measuring what's actually in it.
It's the best indicator of IT alignment.
Okay. So should we take I'm curious, take a vote on this thing. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you. So how many people are going with B? 1, 2. Okay, how many people are going with C?
I'm going to say D.
I think I'm going to stick with B.
So we've got,
We also be 3 Bs,
so we got 3 Bs, no Cs,
2 Ds.
and 2 Ds. Well, yeah, no, we had 1 A once upon a time. Okay, so I'll be the odd one out and I'll go with C. How did that happen?
I was saying C initially.
Yeah.
I just said A.
So let's look at what it's saying. So enterprise architecture helps define standards and designs for IT systems. However, it does not measure how IT is aligned with business. Yep, exactly right. Okay. Policy compliance metrics do not indicate IT's alignment with business. They tell you how much you're complying with the policies. And you could have very well-defined policies in an organization where business and IT are completely misaligned. Policy doesn't achieve compliance or alignment. C, business owners are in the best position to provide the direct feedback on the extent to which IT provides support for business objectives and strategies. Yeah. D, internal control assessment will not provide evidence of IT's alignment with the business. It will simply tell you whether internal controls are effective or ineffective. Okay.
The results
That was a good one.
of business process owners are there.
Yeah. The business process owners are the guys who own it and make the business elements work, whether it's debt collection or manufacturing or whatever. You go and ask them,
They know.
is IT supporting you or not? Are they listening to you? Are they giving you what you need? And they'll tell you. And they'll give you the most blunt, honest answer.
Depends on the IT manager.
Nah.
They like him or they don't.
Last one. Okay, this is going to be my last one. I just need to get to somewhere just after 7. But before I leave, I just want to bring up something. I don't know if you guys will. You were asking about Saturdays for a long time. I just want to suggest chapter 1 and 2 were along some theme. 3 and 4 is along another theme. So I don't know if you're going to have a Saturday session. One of the Saturdays coming up. I don't want to give a specific date. Just to do questions, purely questions on section 1 and 2. Like we'll go through, like what we're doing now, maybe 50, 60, 70, whatever it is, either together or we do it on ourselves and bring it through there. Or maybe randomly you pull it up on screen while you're online on our online one, and we can discuss it as make a team and have scorecards or something. Make it something fun to keep. You know, like we used to do this in EY,
Okay.
core skills, we should have teams and then 4 teams, and then it's not about raising your hand first, it's about your turn, one by one, and get it right. If you get it wrong, go to the next team and you score, and it can be like a game for an hour or 2 or 3 hours even. We can get through at least, in 3 hours, we can get through at least 60 questions, I'd say. 3-4 minutes a question, something like that.
Okay.
I don't know if you all want to, for chapter 1 and 2, random 60 that the computer will generate.
Okay. I'll be there with that.
Huh?
Could even go 150
So
questions.
150 will be tight. It depends on the method. If it takes like 3-4 minutes a question, I'm giving it.
Interactive
Yeah, and
discussion.
then we can fly through some even if you want. And
Some we
quickly
would have
we can
already
just go-
done.
Yeah, we can
So,
skip those.
Yeah.
So just because chapter 1 and 2 are along a similar theme, I don't want to go into 3 and 4 and then come back to 1 and 2 and do all together. Like, we can focus on 1 and 2.
I'm fine with that.
Just say we aim 60, we select 60 questions and do that. Once we're done, we can go home or we can, whatever, depends on how long it takes. But we can budget 3 to 4 hours, maybe 8:30 to 12 or something on Saturday.
Okay.
Pick a day, that's my suggestion. I don't know what you guys say.
I'm fine with that.
You all can vote on it. Obviously, I'm out this weekend, but anytime for next weekend, I'm off. So like, and I suggest the time you all can play with that as well, 9 to 12, 9 to 1, whatever. Something like that, but before lunch, best.
Okay.
Okay, so let me just do one more since we're reading.
I don't think there's too many more questions, but that's fine.
After completing the business impact analysis, what is the next step? See, we need to- So business impact analysis. So you can't develop.
Let's see.
That will be
Why?
required.
Develop the recovery strategies.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Yeah, after the impact, you're going to recover. Yeah, okay.
Because strategy is also the higher level one. Okay, so you develop the recovery strategies. Then you can develop the specific plans.
Yeah,
After you develop
and
the
then you
plans, you can
implement
implement the plan.
And then
Once
you
you've
eliminate
implemented the
it.
plan, you can test and
So you eliminate
maintain it.
those.
So again, there's the cycle, there's the chain, and there's the one that sits higher above the chain. Okay. So let's see, yeah. Okay. An IS audit is reviewing the risk management process. Which of the following is the most important consideration during the review? So it's the review of the risk management process. Sure. It's a tough
Read it
one.
and then decide.
Because there's elements of each one of those that you could argue for. IT risks are presented in business terms. Yeah, they should be, because it helps people to understand them and align it to the business. The approval process for risk response is in place. Yeah, before you go and execute what you're doing, you should get some kind of approval for that. Controls are implemented based on cost-benefit analysis. Absolutely. You don't want to over-control things. And you're going to spend a whole lot of money in the wrong areas doing nothing. So I would go with A, but it doesn't mean the other ones are wrong. There's still a lot of those other ones that are right. But, you know, C and D without A would be more problematic than A without C and D. The answer is D. In order for risk management to be effective, it's necessary to align IT risk with business objectives. This can be done by adopting an acceptable terminology that is understood by all. Yeah.
When we say an IS also, would you always generally try to look at the options that have something related to systems, as opposed to just looking at an auditor?
No, I think an IS auditor is just an auditor who specializes in there, but they still need to understand the overall auditing, and they still need to contribute to the enterprise as a whole. Yeah. This is an interesting one. So controls to mitigate risk must be implemented based on cost-benefit analysis. However, the cost-benefit analysis is effective only if risk is presented in business terms. Okay, I suppose that's fair enough. So they're saying if we don't do D, our cost-benefit analysis could be wrong because we don't properly understand the benefit to the business.
Yeah.
Which is completely true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wasn't looking at it from that angle.
Order risk management to be effective to align IT risk with business objectives.
Yeah, which is 100% right.
Yeah.
And we said that. We were just trying now to balance these things to see which one comes first.
And using acceptable terminology, otherwise people who are not IT
They don't know what it means, they can't contribute, and therefore you won't get the right answers coming out. Okay. So these are the kind of things, these tricky little ones are the ones to remember.
Yeah.
So that when you see it again, you can take that into account. Okay, no problem. Cool. I think we're almost done here.
Which are following the best performance criterion for evaluating the adequacy of an organization's security awareness training. Security
Awareness training. So it's evaluation. I would think it's job descriptions, because job descriptions will contain everything that should actually be done with regards to accountability. And I think I would relate security awareness to job descriptions, because that will make the actual person aware of
what they're
supposed to do exactly.
Especially if that's broad and that's right through the organization, because it means all the managers understand the importance of it, and they all got to a point of actually writing it into their job descriptions of what they need their people to do. So having it there and then balanced scorecards and things like that, absolutely, it's crucial.
So then I think it's easier.
So if we look at D, no actual incidents have occurred. Now that could just be dumb luck. And then C, in accordance with the degree of risk and business impact, there's adequate funding for security efforts. that doesn't mean security awareness training is working. It means there might be one guy at the top who understands what's going on. So B is the only possible solution that's left. Yeah. Okay. Let's work through these fairly quickly now. Okay, which of the following best indicates that a business continuity plan will function as intended in the event of a disaster? A, enforce procedures for regular plan updates. Updating it all the time doesn't mean it'll work. Tabletop exercise for disaster scenarios, no. A comprehensive reciprocal agreement.
I don't know what those last two mean.
That's just agreement. Perhaps like say, do you agree, if you're part of the plan, do you agree that you're supposed to do this?
I think it might. I think a reciprocal agreement might be with another organization to say, if we've got a disaster on our premises, we can share with you and use some of yours, and if you have a problem, you can use some of ours.
Like with systems and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, this is trickier than it first looks. Okay. D, long haul diversity and last mile redundancy. Yeah, that. So long haul diversity and last mile redundancy is saying that, you know, if we put links to other offices and things, they're taking different paths, and we've got redundant links for the last mile. So that could be networking, power, going to different exchanges, going to different substations. So that one is quite positive. Sure, I'll go with D, but I'm not sure on this one. Yeah, it is, and but then you see they're also talking about BCP and not DRP. I'm struggling with this one.
Following this indicates that business continuity plan will function as intended in the event of a disaster. I think it's C though.
Those seem very specific, you see, whereas the tabletop exercise with disaster scenarios is potentially looking at lots of different scenarios. So that might be able to tell you whether it's going to work in the event of a disaster, because you might be testing lots of different disasters there, whereas a reciprocal agreement might only cover one kind of disaster, and the long haul diversity and last mile redundancy might only cover one type of disaster, but the tabletop thing might cover a whole lot of different ones.
Sure.
So it's like,
after you explain like that, I think the.
But you know what? When they explain it, they could explain it completely differently and give a completely different view on it again. But
let's look at the answer.
Okay, let's see what it is. But perhaps B it is. And the answer is B. Tabletop exercises used to test the effectiveness of a BCP without interrupting full scale. The test team walks through simulated disaster to determine of the options given. A tabletop ensures that BCP will function as intended without live testing to reveal planned deficiencies. Okay. Reciprocal agreements will specify the conditions among counterparties for sharing facilities. Okay. Long haul diversity and last mile redundancy, important considerations for BCP, but by themselves are insufficient to ensure the plans work. Sure. It just shows you read through, you think of this, you think of that, you think of that, and then you
if only we could think of it the way you think of it.
But the idea is to just pull it apart and keep looking at the things, and the more practice you get at it, the more you'll consider those things. And one of the tricks to it is also not to jump to conclusions too quickly. You know, we started off by writing off B. And then when you look to the others, it's like, hang on, none of these are really making sense. And then you come back to it, and then you're okay with it.
An IS auditor reviewing IT projects for a large company and wants to determine whether the IT projects undertaken in a given year are those which have been assigned the highest priority by the business and which will generate the greatest business, blah, blah, blah. Most relevant. What's in the end there? Greatest business?
It's cut off, I can't see.
Okay.
Oh wait, no, hang on. Let's just see if we can maybe scroll across. I'm saying that without actually checking properly. Value.
Oh, good. Okay.
Which of the following would be the most relevant? Okay, so it's to generate business value.
to know your theory.
Project management. I would write off C and D.
So it could be B. But why? Portfolio management is reviewing IT projects. Yeah, because
Yeah, so portfolio management, that's what it is all about. It's
Projects
by looking at all the projects together, understanding their benefit and potential and cost and whatever, and deciding which ones to do. So yeah, I would go with portfolio management.
It's like a collection of
Correct
projects.
answer is B. Yep.
Mm.
Okay, exactly that. Okay. Which of the following distinguishes a business impact assessment from a risk assessment?
Business impact and risk assessment.
And move into critical assets. That's BIA. That's,
Yeah.
okay.
Alright.
A listing of threats. That's risk assessment.
And like impact and likelihood.
The following distinguishes the business
No,
from risk. So which one is BIA, right?
Okay, so what's BIA?
business impact analysis.
And what does it do? Why do we do it?
We want to find out which risks actually impact the business. No,
Partly. Okay.
what impacts? Like an analysis.
Business impact assessment, we want to understand
The
if a
critical-
business process is down or if a system is down,
Mm.
what does that do to the overall business? How long can something be down for? They talk about recovery
Oh,
time
yeah.
objectives and recovery point objectives.
Okay.
Okay. So with that description in mind,
Okay. I think after you explain what that is now, business impact analysis with recovery point and recovery time objective, then D is the answer.
yeah, so D was my first choice, and hopefully it is the one, and it is, yeah. Because that's really the purpose of it, and so when you look at it, it's a key distinction between the two. All the others are in common. So what are your assets? What's the threats? All those things, but yeah, a risk assessment's not looking at those things.
It's made only in a business impact.
Okay, so I think we've got one or two questions left.
If an organization has a well-established risk management process, which of the following risk management practices would most likely expose the organization to the greatest amount of compliance risk?
Risk reduction.
Okay, risk transfer is transferring, like getting an insurance person. Risk mitigation, risk reduction. What is risk reduction? Which organization has a well-established risk management process. Most likely expose the organization to the greatest amount of compliance risk. I would have also went for risk avoidance. Avoiding risks that is actually important.
No, risk avoidance means we decline to do the business process.
Oh,
So we
okay.
close the division,
Okay.
so then there is no risk left behind.
Okay, so with risk transfer, that's transferring the risk to somebody else.
So that could be like taking out insurance.
Insurance, yes.
So you don't have to worry about compliance there.
Well, no, it's not saying that. It becomes somebody else's problem,
Yes, it does.
but we might still be non-compliant.
To the greatest amount of compliance risk.
Yeah, I would go with risk transfer, but actually, no, maybe not.
Risk reduction. Risk mitigation.
And risk
Mitigation might be, because if you're putting mitigations in place, you're putting controls in place.
Yeah.
If you're putting controls in place, you have the
Not
greatest
sure.
risk of the control not working, then you've got the greatest compliance risk.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, because risk mitigation.
because you're right. Under risk mitigation, under risk transfer, you don't really care about compliance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going with D. It's a nervous look there, going, and
Risk transfer.
B. So let's see what they say. So we had it and we gave it away.
Property.
Risk transfer typically addresses financial risk, for example, insurance policy, while compliance risk continues to exist.
Oh, okay. Now we would never forget that.
Mitigating risk will still expose the organization to a certain amount of risk. Risk mitigation lowers risk levels to commensurate with the organization's appetite. However, choice B is the best answer because risk mitigation treats the risk. Wow. Risk transfer does not necessarily address compliance risk. Yeah. Okay.
Let me give the example of that I'm thinking.
Mhm.
Suppose risk against fire, right?
Yeah.
You get a policy of our stock being destroyed by fire. And you get a policy that in the case of fire, will be paid for that stock. But that policy does not stop the fire department or whoever, municipality, for checking our premises that are we compliant in terms of our premises being
And then the insurance will not pay out because of that.
yeah.
Okay. Some of these are tricky. It's just that when you start to get tired, you then start to miss those little things.
Yeah.
That's why I often say to people, be very careful about trying to study until midnight or
Yeah,
some
sure.
ridiculous hour the night before the exam. The best thing you can do is study weeks and weeks in advance. And when you get there to those couple of days before, go out and watch a movie or do something completely just
That's why it's good that we are doing what we're doing at this moment. We're going through everything because I would never ever do this. Oh, there's another question.
last question. Sorry, we missed one. Okay, but now I've shown you the answer.
No, we didn't see it.
Which of the following is an appropriate test method to apply to a BCP? A pilot test, a paper test, a unit test, a system test.
Appropriate test.
Okay, we've spoken about these things a few times this evening. So when it comes to
An appropriate test method to apply to a BCP.
some of these are more like development tests rather than DR BCP tests. So which one of those is a BR DCP test? Yep, B, paper tests.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Because of there's a preparedness and the paper and then.
So there we have it.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay.
let's
And when was the pilot?
Yeah, okay, we'll see what it says. Choices A, C, and D are
development tests. I think there we go. Not appropriate for BCP. Okay, that's cool. Okay.
Thank you.
Where's bye-bye? We still got somebody online. Probably Catherine.
Bye.
Have questions.
Bye-bye. Have a good evening. Thanks for your questions.
So we'll see you next week for chapter 3.
Yeah, indeed we shall.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.